Hello, everybody. I am Marc LiVecche. I am the McDonald Scholar for Ethics, War, and Public Life at Providence, a journal of Christianity and American foreign policy. And this is another episode of the Foreign Policy Provcast, the podcast where Providence folks talk about all things foreign policy, military ethics, diplomacy, and the like. I am here with frankly, a fellow curmudgeon and just war scholar, Keith Pavlischek. Keith Pavlischek is a formerly commissioned Marine Corps officer. He's done intelligence work. He's been a contractor. He's taught. He started all sorts of good institutes in Washington, and he was an early sort of founding father to Providence, early contributor. And he is presently in West Virginia, which I have on good authority is how do you say it's West by God and not Virginia?
West by God, Virginia.
There you go. And he is currently culling deer, and I look forward to maybe participating in some of the fruits of that sometime in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, Keith, we are going to have something of a Friday. It is Friday when this is being recorded. I don't know if I'm going to release it this afternoon, but it is Friday. Actually, this might be important given how events can change, but it's Friday, November 2nd, I believe.
Third.
Is it the second? Third?
Yeah. One week away from the biggest event of the year, Marine Corps birthday on November 10th. That's next Friday.
I kind of walked right into that, didn't I? I sure did. All right. So it's Friday, and we are going to have something of a gripe session of some of the responses that we've seen to the Israeli-Hamas war, or variously couched as the Israeli-Iran war through their proxies. However you want to couch that, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to get. I think some of our focus is going to be on just responses that we have seen and responses that deserve a counter response. I think if people think of the early founding of Providence, there are a number of things that we wanted to push against. One was to push against Christian pacifism, which we're going to do some shoving today. A second was to push back against sort of opposite to that, to push against kind of a jaundiced, cynical realism within foreign policy. We want to be realistic, but at the same time, we don't want to disabuse or excise morality from foreign policy altogether. The third thing was to push against a knee-jerk anti-Israelism, which I thought at some point we no longer really had to worry about, only to discover on October 8th, actually, we still do have to worry about that. And I can't remember what our fourth pushback was, but there was a fourth one, and maybe we'll inadvertently get to it. But Keith, welcome.
Well, thanks. I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you. I think we said that when we first started to discuss it, I think your first comment was to make it a "we told you so" type conversation, and I think there's going to be a lot of that.
I think so.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
I hate to be right, Keith.
Well, some of this was like after the massacre, the responses were so predictable. It was like a big fat hanging curveball.
Right.
So we're gonna see if we could launch a few into the left field bleachers.
This is probably, you don't have to bring a confession today, but this is probably something of a confession. I am a continually dying idealist in a lot of ways, and my wife will be the first to tell you I can be hopelessly naive. So on October 6th, I would have expected to have the kind of conversation we're about to have. On October 7th, when things first kicked off, I started thinking this kind of conversation might no longer be necessary. And then October 8th came along, and I realized, oh, no, the same conversations have to happen.
Yeah, I guess I knew that we were gonna see the kind of responses we eventually got, but I thought it would take a while because the magnitude of the slaughter, and I thought it would be a while, and maybe wait until Israel mobilized and were able to begin the ground invasion. But it started. It started immediately.
Started immediately. I don't even know if the corpses were all cold, frankly, when people started slinging nonsense.
Well, we at Providence, and I've done this in particular in lectures and writing, is pushing back at pacifism. Yeah, but not. But I've made a point to push back even more on um, not so much pacifism, but what we've termed maybe a crypto pacifist
Hmm.
or functional pacifist interpretation of the just war tradition.
What do you
And
expound on that? What is that?
yeah, we've been talking about this for almost 30 years now. Um, our friend Jim Johnson and George Weigel call it the presumption against war position. I think more accurately, I think it was Daryl Cole came up with the term that the view that views the just war tradition or just war theory as a limited exception to pacifism. And so when you understand the use in bello or use ad bellum in those terms, it fundamentally distorts the classical meaning of the tradition from top to bottom. And so we've
If you were
been
going to summarize that distortion, what is the key takeaway? What is the problem?
yeah. So it's what happens is you know you get these lists of the justification for going to war that you said at bellum, and so there's right intention, legitimate authority, just cause. Now what's those are the causes that permit you to go to war, and Augustine and Aquinas and the tradition. And then there is a list of other, like last resort, proportionality of ends. Uh, what else is in there? Last resort, right?
Probability of success,
Probability of
proportionality
success.
of ends,
These are all practical. These are all practical uh, uh,
prudential
decisions.
wisdom
Yeah,
consideration.
prudential decisions made by policymakers in going to war. And but what happens in the tradition? What happens when you take a pacifist approach toward these things, or a crypto pacifist approach, is you you invert the priority so that
Exactly right.
just cause, right intention become secondary, when in fact they're the deontological, or they're the duty bound
Yep.
most important core of the tradition. And then those who are in authority take a look at the prudential calculations. And there's a logic behind that, because even if you got a just cause,
Yep.
I mean, if you're going to commit national suicide and responding to the just cause, even with the right intent, that's like probability of success. So those get inverted. That's you said at Bellum, but and I guess what we're going to discuss today is the way the use in bello criteria of discrimination or non-combatant immunity and proportionality uh, get distorted,
Right.
um, and distorted so that what is in effect, what they allow in through the back door, is a pacifist stance anyway.
I think they're obviously, well, not obviously, because not everybody does so, but they're obviously to be connected, right? The use ad bellum, when is it right to fight? And the use in bello, how do you rightly fight the fight that's right to fight? And I think they're connected in a number of ways. The one that's important maybe here is if you do this inversion, actually, let's get to the inversion in a second. The way you cash it out, I think, is exactly right. You've got the deontological duties. And I learned to put the stress on it this way, not to say that if you've got a proper authority who identifies a just cause and who has a proper aim, that person is now permitted to fight. I say, well, no, the tradition actually says
You're blind.
you are not obligated to fight. Like, you have to fight. And then you look at the prudential criteria, and if it turns out that wisdom so strongly mitigates against the doing of your duty, then you stand down. But that is a tragedy, and it's not how it's supposed to be. Things are so awry that you can't do your duty. And that should register as a tragedy. When you invert those and you have the prudence first, and there's these almost insurmountable obstacles before you can go to war. Then when you look to the in bellow, how do I rightly fight this fight that's barely right to fight? Now all of a sudden I start grading battlefield tactics against my overwhelming desire to not be fighting. And I give myself every excuse available to not do certain things. Whereas if you keep the duty first, you might determine, you know what? This particular tactic is going to be god awful. There are going to be dead kids. There are going to be women blown apart. This is going to be horrible. But this is militarily necessary, and it is the only viable tactic that I have at my um, in my quiver by which I can begin to move toward the war aims.
Yeah, you mentioned military necessity. I had seen years ago in a few of the lists that and of the in bello list, one was military necessity. So in addition, and I always said, well, that's odd because you just military necessity shouldn't be included as a use in bello list. It's just simply assumed, right? But I've been thinking lately, maybe we need to stick those in there because, I mean, as you know, and we'll get into this, military proportionality, the in particular, is proportional to what? It's proportional to the military necessity. It's to be measured against the just tactical, operational, strategic objective. Not what.
Tit for tat. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a tit for tat thing. It's like, what would be proportional? Well, they raped 50 women and killed 40 babies. If we limited our response, if we limited our response, no. So I mean, it's absurd. So
I just got
um,
off. I did a similar recording earlier today. I don't know when it's going to drop with Robert Kaufman from Pepperdine, and he closed out by saying, "I'm going to butcher the quote, so we'll have to check out the podcast when it comes out." But he was talking to someone, a former professor or supervisor of his, who pointed out that the work of scholarship very often is to just talk about the obvious, and sometimes,
yeah, oh yeah.
you know,
Well, yeah, and that's I guess our task because there's so much silliness out there. Um, it just occurred to me that um, we had mentioned this before that uh, I thought it was going to be a while before we're going to have to respond and address questions of proportionality, but I thought it would be wait until the ground invasion, but um, it started right away. And in fact, over at National Review, one of the senior editors, Michael Doherty,
mm,
actually picked up on the piece I wrote on proportionality for the New Atlantis back in 2010.
hmm
And I'm happy to say he quoted me extensively uh,
and favorably.
on in favorably, not yeah, um, and then it was later picked up by Charlie Cook, who I think is a great guy over there, as the pick of the week. So I
Yeah.
got a little bit of positive publicity on that, but
I thought
this
I
was
was the
October
only one
10th.
who liked you.
Yeah, so that was October 10th. That was like 3 days after the slaughter,
Yep.
and so uh, as you say, part of this. What I was going to say was that in that article I quote Michael Walzer, and you've heard me quote Walzer when he was writing in Parameters, explaining what we had been talking about. How this is Michael Walzer, who is a secular. He's a lefty. He's a democratic socialist. He's always been like that. I make the crack that he's Bernie Sanders with brains, right? But he he pointed out in that article how exactly what we were saying, that so much of just war theory has become, just a false justification, uh, uh, and by a whole host of clerics and journalists, and you know, to to demonstrate that there's no war that they could ever support. So
Sure.
I like the. I mean, that's pretty good. That's pretty good company. To so Jim Johnson and George Weigel have been thumping on that. I've been pounding. You've been pounding. The Providence people have been pounding. And all of a sudden, here comes Michael Walzer, specifically addressing the distortions
Yeah.
of proportionality. Now, I go on later to criticize Walzer's. We don't need to get into that, but maybe we could post. When we post this, post a link.
Yeah. Good.
Because I spent some time trying to get at Walzer's attempt to alter the traditional doctrine of double effect, but that's a little bit too much for just a conversation. But
It might be, although when we talk about some of the, Gene Elshtain, I mean, all sorts of people do this, but, Gene constantly rattled on about the importance of being able to make basic distinctions. And, if we put together a gripe list, the butchery people have been making of proportionality, that's going to be on there. Christian pacifism or crypto pacifism is going to be on there. But it's certainly another one that has come out since October 7th is the continuing inability of otherwise intelligent people to make basic distinctions between good and evil, terrorist and legitimate soldier, just cause, unjust cause, and all the like. And one of the places that they'll do this, of course, are the photographs and the reports of dead children. And for somebody to, they will say a dead Palestinian child is equivalent to a dead Jewish child. And if that's all I said, well, of course that's true. But if you want to suggest that a dead Jewish child on October 7th is the same as a dead Palestinian child on October 15th who was killed in an airstrike because Hamas was, storing ammunition in his home or his school or the building next door, now we've got issues. And so when people talk about intention and therefore double effect does come into view, well, these are basic decision or distinction making mechanisms that people have just abandoned.
yeah, so um, my this leads right into a post. Well, it was I'm not on Twitter or X or I I would probably I I'd probably be canceled.
Scorched earth, Pavlischek. It would be scorched earth.
Yeah, I I'm bad enough on Facebook, but I don't I don't do X, but I I I know that my friend Francis
Right.
Beckwith, Frank Beckwith
Yes.
down at Baylor, is a philosopher, very good analytic philosopher, moral theologian. Um, he he sent me this. He had posted. Um, well, I'll just tell you. He said he's an analytic philosopher. So, like, I have enough analytic philosophy under my belt to be a little dangerous. He's really good. So he uses this thought experiment. He says, uh, imagine that the only way that Jews could stop the Nazi camps was to bomb military installations hidden in Berlin neighborhoods. Okay. Would the Jews be justified in acting, or must Jews cooperate with their own genocide when their self-defense may unintentionally kill innocents? Okay, and so this may be too much inside baseball, but he got a response from John Milbank, who is one of the he's a very prominent moral theologian. Okay, written multi-volumes. Okay, and he says it does not. He says Malik puts things well and is unreserved in his condemnation of Hamas. Okay, I'm condemning Hamas. Well, that's very courageous. The answer to here's what he says. The answer to atrocity cannot be counter-atrocity, not even of a, quote, less bad, unquote, kind. So think about that for a second. Get right exactly what you said. The 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 bombing of military installations with the unintended side effects of harming German civilians is morally equivalent. It is an atrocity, just like the atrocity of taking Jews to the ovens and making lampshades out of their skins.
Right.
Now, there are some things that are so stupid and ignorant that you have to be a modern theologian to endorse.
Yeah.
And you can Google John Milbank, and but I mean, it's astounding. This is an elemental distinction, right? By intent alone. This reminded me. I was at this was in the '90s. I was up at the war, Carlisle,
Army War College.
Yeah, the Army War College, and there was a similar question. I remember Jim Johnson was there, in fact, and one of the hypotheticals was thrown out. If we had known, that the death camps were there, and that we could run an airstrike close by the death camp, and take out some guards, but we also know that we could actually harm the prisoners there. And there was a bunch of hee-hawing back and forth. I was exasperated. I said, "Wait, there, you can make. There's two mistakes you can make in ethics. One is to make really hard decisions too easy, right, and be flippant about it. The other one is to make easy ones hard. It's if I know that." That the unintended effect of my strike might kill some prisoners who are heading to the ovens, right? Why is that a difficult call, right? And of course, you're trying. What is your intent? Your intent is to stop the genocide, right? And the unintended but perhaps foreseeable effect, because of the maybe inaccuracy of the weapons, would be to harm innocents, even those you are aiming to help. So we could go. I guess we could go on. There are a multitude of examples. You and I had discussed a few days ago the breakout of Normandy. And we put Allied civilians at risk because we had to get off the beach. Was it Sun Lo? I don't have my Michael Walzer book, but he has an extended discussion of that in Just and Unjust Wars.
No, absolutely.
And
at one point, we needed to put rubble in the street in order to prevent their reserve, tanks from being able to come up to the beach. But by putting rubble into the street, the best way to do that was to put apartment buildings into the street. Those apartment buildings were populated by a bunch of Frenchmen, and that is ghastly. But by bombing those buildings and putting that rubble in those streets and preventing those tanks from pushing us off the beach, we were able to liberate France. And so all these, if you look at any one of these actions in isolation, right, you might say, well, yeah, we're not going to do that. That's horrible. But if you look at these discrete actions as they pile on top of one another and lead to greater and larger realities, then you begin to realize, oh, like actually this fits into something much bigger. And that's been one of my frustrations is people look at proportionality and even discrimination in isolation. This one event, this one attack, this one possible operation rather than to ask themselves, where does this particular tactical operation fit into a larger campaign? And how did that larger campaign fit into a larger battle, fit into a larger war aim? We
And
don't do that.
yeah, and the gravity of the evil you're fighting.
Well, that's right. So
You
that
know,
brings, again, that's another place where the ad bellum and the in bello come back together. Like I might expect the IDF to fight in increased grim ways than I might have expected the English or the British fighting the Argentinians over the Falkland Islands. There wasn't as much at stake, right?
yeah, and there weren't civilians either. So it's,
Right.
I mean, but I think listen. We just have to say it as bluntly as possible that the IDF, in terms of their adherence to the laws of war
Correct.
and the use in bello, are playing way inside the lines.
Right. That's
I
right.
mean, if you use a football metaphor, if the out of bounds, they're playing inside the hash marks.
Yep.
And they're, and this is where I think we're getting into territory that's not just about the laws of war. We, it's like I don't know, you know, the international community expects of Israel what they would never expect of anybody else.
Right. Why?
Well, yeah, let's just call it what it is. It's anti-Semitism. It's Jew hatred. I mean, it's Jew hatred. That may be another conversation we have. But why is Israel uniquely condemned? Right? I mean, who else? I mean, this was the point that we were making back in 2008, 9, and 10. When they were blathering on about proportionality, and without asking the question, who's responsible for putting these civilians into harm's way?
Right.
With you, like Walzer says, and I quote him, is that proportionality is it's the cheap and easy way to avoid the question of responsibility. So if you've got headquarters, arms, and infrastructure under a hospital, where does the responsibility shifts for the damage that comes if that's struck? Well, in international law, it's crystal clear. It falls on the people that have put them there, and
Right.
and Israel goes goes a step further by warning. Right. So, yeah, and I think it's I think it's Jew hatred, it's anti-Semitism. We talked more about this, but it's also a carryover, Mark, from the 20th century way of viewing wars of national liberation, and became a way to say that the civilian protective standards that were put in place by the international law, Geneva Conventions, and the like, don't apply in unconventional warfare or guerrilla warfare, or more fundamentally between the what we call now the oppressed and the colonizers and the colonized.
Right.
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 It's the same thing. It's the Maoist guerrilla playbook in
Right.
which the convention's civilian protective standards, wear uniforms or wear signs openly, carry arms openly, and even uh, um, the Maoist supported selective terror and hostage shield tactics, and selective terror. So those couldn't those can't apply. Those can't apply because it's not a fair fight between state actors. And of course, the just war tradition says that that's legitimate authority. They don't have the authority to do that. There's more to say about that, but the civilian protective standards don't apply to those who fighting, wars of national liberation. And so it's a carryover from that. But by the way, that's why in the 1980s, I think it was 1987, the United States refused under the Reagan administration, and had wide support in Congress, not to ratify Protocol 1 of the Geneva Accords, with explicit justification. I looked at this the other day. Explicit justification that it would support and condone terrorism. So the international community was moving towards a lowering of those civilian protective standards for revolutionary groups. So you would think that after the defeat of the Soviet Union, the collapse of Marxist movements worldwide, you would not have this much sympathy holdover when you're dealing with jihadi terrorists, right? But here we are. We've got a rise up in support of Hamas, who quotes the protocols of the elders of Zion in their charter. It sounds like international, something out of the Ku Klux Klan, and it gets the support of American leftist intellectuals. So it's that convergence of old Marxism, particularly Maoist insurgent strategies, with this new, postmodern colonial, anti-colonial theme, and so it's shocking. It's shocking to a lot of us to see the kind of stuff that's going on campus, and it's frustrating, because we tend to think, oh yeah, what I need to do is expose their contradictions and show the logic. What the logic of their position leads to being unable to respond to gross acts of terror and massacre, uh, and you do that, and you win the arguments, but it doesn't matter. It's like
it usually doesn't. I wanted to add to your list of things that have fallen into the stew. I wanted to add colossal ignorance and say, well, a lot of these people, they simply don't understand the history. They talk about stolen land as if the Palestinians had always been there, as if the Palestinians had always been a people, on and on and on. Oh, we just got to clean up their ignorance, and they'll be able to make better, rational, moral judgments. And for some of them, that works. But for a vast host of them, you discover, there's an ideology behind your ignorance, that once you're disabused of your ignorance, you're still going to stick to the ideology. And then that's where we get into the new Marxist anti-Semitism.
old, old Catholic moral theologians talked about vincible ignorance and invincible ignorance, or culpable ignorance and inculpable ignorance. What you've just disguised is there are some people that are they can't be blamed for their ignorance simply because they haven't been tutored, but they could be tutored. They could be tutored, instructed, and they would learn the history. They would learn the tradition. They would learn the logic, the moral logic, right, of the just war tradition in particular, and the broader history behind international law. And then there are some people that will just simply tell you, no, the just war tradition, international law, is a tool of the colonizers and a tool of the oppressors, and so we need to get beyond that. And those people, and I'm afraid the latter are on the ascendancy, and those people have tremendous cultural power in this country. Which brings it. We may have mentioned this in passing in some past. It's like that, and I've been listening to a lot of different podcasts, and you just got to. What prompts this is that some of these crazy protests on campus. I mean, just pure Jew hatred, stuff, and you see some prominent millionaire Jewish philanthropists and stuff, you know, uh, cutting off funds to go to Harvard or Columbia or some of these other places. And of course, some of us want to say, I mean, it took the slaughter of October 7th for you to understand, what is going on. You say we're curmudgeons, but it's like, come on, man, this is like right under your nose. Then there are, of course, they get dismissed as being neoconservative or whatever. Who Jews who say, yeah, we kind of told, it's like we kind of told you so, and the rest of us, we say, well, we told you so, and now all of a sudden they're waking up, and so I don't know. It's like maybe. I mean, I don't know what to think. Is the rot so deep that it's not going to turn around? Will this open people out? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So
It's
let's turn to let's go against our own grain and be naively optimistic for a moment, intentionally so. I've had a number of phone calls from pastors over the last couple of weeks saying, "Okay, look, I've read your stuff. I know where you're coming from a little bit, but I still don't know how to talk to my congregation about this. So here are my questions." College students at the National Security Conference we just recently held, Christian college students who want to know how to think about these things because they see the news reports, they see ghastly things, they see things that they know ought not to have to happen or ought not to happen. And and then they see their peers and even their professors uh, advocating or supporting Hamas, denigrating what the Jews are doing, the Israelis are doing, and you would have to be a fairly stout young man or woman to not, just fall into a moral paralysis and not know what to do. So let's imagine the scenario. Um, you've got an honest, confused, young Christian college student who comes to you and says, "Look, like I think I grasp that there are times where we have to fight." Now, I think that goes against what I think is the character of Jesus, but I get it. I've heard the explanations. I'm willing to believe that there are times that good people have to fight, and that either that's compatible with being a Christian, or maybe I take an Iberian turn and it's still wrong, but it would be more wrong not to do it. And so I've got some guilt and sin I'll have to deal with. But the Christian response should still be to fight. I get all that. But Mr. Pavlischek, I get that October 7th was horrible. Uh, but the response has been sufficient. Like, I get the proportionality thing, or I half get it. Okay, all of that, fine. But look, by now, aren't we done? Shouldn't there be a ceasefire? Shouldn't we try to reconcile? Why do we have to push for the end of Hamas when between now and the end of Hamas are going to be more dead Palestinian kids? How do I think about that, Dr. Pavlischek? So he's honest, he's not being belligerent.
well, yeah. Well, assuming that they've internalized what we would consider the tradition, that is, that we would, assuming that they've been taught what they have not been taught. That okay, I could sit with them and begin to discuss from the New Testament, and what I could do exegetical work. I could discuss Aquinas and Augustine, the medieval tradition, what the reformers say. I could say, listen, I'm not making this stuff up. You know, I, and assuming they've internalized that. So now it's a prudential question, right? So why? So what you're asking me? They've they understand the jus in bello and jus ad bellum, right? And so then then the discussion has to go in, okay, what is the magnitude of the threat that Israel, who can justly respond, right? Uh, in other words, they've already assumed, yes, they can respond with the use of force, lethal force, military force. So their question is, why the elimination of Hamas? And I would take them to the gravity of the threat. Now we're going to do geopolitics.
Sure.
And I would take them to what Hamas believes.
What do they believe?
They believe, this is not just anti-Zionism.
Right.
They believe in the elimination of Jews. It's in their charter. I would urge people to please read them,
Right.
listen to what their leaders
The
say.
1987 Hamas charter clearly dictates the obliteration of
Jews.
Some will equivocate and say, well, it says the Jewish state. There could still be a place for Jews. You could
You
ask yourself,
cannot read
how would
that
that go?
charter.
No, you can't.
You cannot read that charter and read it as and in fact, I mean, I wrote a piece, and maybe we could post this a while back. I was very much impressed by this book by Matthias Kunzel, who wrote Jihad and Jew Hatred in this was like 2005, 6, something like that. But he was a former Green Party member, a lefty in the in Germany, and he started to do research on where exactly did the Muslim Brotherhood, and Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza.
The Muslim Brotherhood wasn't belligerent enough.
Yeah, well, he tracks the Jew hatred, right, to the Muslim Brotherhood, through the Grand Mufti of. It was imported from Nazi Germany.
Right.
It was the exterminationist Jew hatred, right, has intellectual roots in Nazi Germany. Now, not all of the anti-Jewishness in the Middle East is rooted in that.
Sure.
Hamas's is. Where do you get the protocols of the elders of Zion? Right. So there's also a very strong strain in Islamist teaching that once a territory is held by Islam, it can't go back, right? And so the very existence of the state of Israel is an affront to pious Muslims, right? So it's sort of a mix of traditional Islamist notions and this Nazi inspired Jew hatred. So after I go through that, I say, okay, this is the threat they face. It's an existential threat. Why do you think when you walk down the streets of Israel, you see 19, 18-year-old little girls carrying submachine guns?
Right.
Because why? Because they're a militaristic state.
Right.
It's an existential threat. And we Americans
don't understand that.
We don't get that.
We don't get that at all. We've been calling Hamas a tactical threat to the people of Israel. Right. I think there's a strong argument. Bob Kaufman will make this argument in the podcast we did. There are no tactical threats to the people of Israel. Every threat is an existential threat.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's
Israel
not like God.
decides,
Yeah, and it's not like God. It's not like Hamas. Hamas is simply one proxy,
right,
in the greater Iranian and Iran. It's like Iran. Once you accept the fact that the Sunni uh, um, uh, Muslims in the Muslim Brotherhood are aligned with Iran, with a common enemy, and Hezbollah, right? And so it's all you got to do is look at a map.
Right.
It's like they're surrounded.
Right.
and
Maps are important in
and
this.
what's that?
Maps are important in this. They're essential.
It- that's right. And so and then I would go on to a discussion of how, listen, they could have had a two-state solution in 1999, and what happened?
1948.
What?
1948.
Well, yeah, but okay. I mean, I'm talking more recently. It's like after all the issues, 1999 two-state solution, and what did they choose? They chose Intifada, the second Intifada,
Yep.
and uh, and and um, and, anyway. So it's not like, and then finally, I think it's a cliche, but it's no less. I mean, it's no less a truth because it's a cliche. But as Golden Meir said that um, if the Palestinians put down their arms and created a state, there would be peace in the Middle East. If the Israelis put down their arms, uh, they would be utterly destroyed. Right? That's and then Israel doesn't. Israel, again, we're speaking to this college student who has imbibed the just war tradition, rightly understood. Um, Israel doesn't want Gaza. They, they they don't want it. They withdrew from it. They dragged some settlers kicking and screaming out of there.
Right.
Right?
I think I Googled it. Maybe the number doesn't matter, but it was some 9,000 settlers, I think. I mean, it was no
Yeah.
small operation.
Yeah. I mean, they dragged them out of there and said, okay, you got it. And so, again, why do we expect of Israel facing an existential threat to behave like we would not expect anybody else to behave?
Right.
You know, it's and that's where I get to, you know, the abomination of Jew hatred and anti-Semitism.
No, that's right. And then you could drag into this conversations about the responsibilities of sovereigns, and you look at Israel as a sovereign state and the way they're treating and protecting their people. Basic function of being sovereign is to maintain the order and the justice and therefore the peace of your own people. You compare that to Hamas, they get duly elected in 2006. They promptly suspend elections in 2007, and then they press on with the subjugation of their own people. And somebody, I think it was Rebecca Heinrichs, disputed the notion that Hamas uses their own people as human shields. And what she meant by that is they're not human shields. You use a human shield when you don't want the people to be killed. Like they're perfectly happy for the people that they're hiding behind to be killed because it works into their propaganda war, which is the only war they can possibly win.
Yeah, it's a double cost, just like it is for all insurgencies. If you if you if you abide by very strict civilian protective standards, uh, or if you or rather if you want to be so humanitarian you won't accept any unintended but foreseen casualties, well then they win because
Right.
you can't attack. So it just promotes that kind of behavior. But if you do, they use it as a propaganda. They win the propaganda war because people are, don't understand that the real, you know, the real reason for them doing this is to make them immune from attack, and then they can do whatever they want. Um, yeah, and the other thing is, it's related to your question. Is I would point out that you know, Israelis were at each other's throat for like a year. I
Yep.
mean, it was really bad.
Right.
Was the folks over at Commentary says, if they really want to be successful in tearing in opposing Israel, just let them go. They'll be at civil war. Just leave them alone. And so you had these mass protests, and the people were saying, "Oh, we're not going to serve in the we're not going to serve in the reserves anymore." So you had these massive protests. Can you imagine saying, "I'm not going to serve in the IDF"?
Right. You
Um,
had people not showing up for duty. They'd be called up for regular duty, and they would
uh,
not show
yeah,
up. So you can
yeah.
forgive Hamas for
So there were,
miscalculating to the
and
nth
I'm not
degree.
even sure it was over judicial reform. It's like I don't know enough about it, but it really it got them going. They were going crazy. And it's like, so that's the normal stuff of democracy, right? But after this attack,
Boom.
I mean, it's like they're unified. The way left, everybody's unified. The left is on board now. So um um so you've got consensus, and when the wolf is at your door, you know you know the family stop shooting at each other, and they break out the shotguns to shoot the wolf.
Absolutely.
Oh, now somebody's going to say, "Oh, you've dehumanized the Hamas." I'm sorry I used that metaphor, but
Hey,
the point is,
actually, I think you're being cruel to the wolf, Bev. But
yeah.
so I mean, yeah, the only way I can see the sense behind what Hamas did, presuming that Iran told them to pull the trigger, is they maybe they gambled on Israel not being able to call up a sufficient force to strike back. But I'd be surprised if they'd make that miscalculation. They might have, but I think Iran also looked at the geopolitics in the region
Yeah.
and
Oh, yeah.
saw Saudi Arabia wanting to begin to join the Abraham Accords, and they needed to try to demonstrate to Israel's would-be friends that Israel is not as strong as you think they are. They're not a good partner for you. And Israel now, and this isn't, Israel needs to demonstrate that they are what they've always been. They are tough and strong, and they can win this fight.
Well, after it was, I mean, first thing, one thing I think there's a consensus is that Bibi, well, he's got a reputation of really being a, hard, hard guy, right?
Oh yeah,
But
I fell in love with him in the first Gulf War.
but he, I think the consensus is that he and the IDF took their eyes off the ball.
Oh, for sure.
They started to focus on the West Bank. They thought Hamas was, um, uh, you know, uh,
Hamas boasted about it. There was an interview between a Hamas official who
you
laughed
know.
and said, "We made the Jews think for 2 years that we had become serious about governing our people, but we were really planning this attack."
So, I mean, the political result is going to be Bibi's done, regardless of how this ends. But
And I think it's also, I think Hamas overplayed their hand in another way because I think not only were they focusing on the West Bank, but the Iron Dome and David's sling probably gave Israelis reason to believe that they could move forward in a defensive posture. And from what I understand, they began to retract from a lot of their offensive positions, and they won't make that mistake twice.
yeah, there's going to be. It's too early to really. It's I've read some stuff because it was obvious. It's the way my mind works. It's like, well, this is an intelligence failure. How did they mess this up so bad? So I've read some pieces. I think Wall Street Journal's done some good coverage. That there's going to be some more on that. They clearly, I mean, it seems the initial reports were that they shifted to some technical means. They shifted to the West Bank, and so, but that's a story that's going to be told, and it's going to be told in all its ugliness. And I mean, but yeah, it's yeah, anyway. The other thing that was initially said is that they 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 may have underestimated the Hamas may have underestimated the success that they would have. In other words, they were so unprepared to meet. Um, the defense was minimal. I mean, right away, people were saying, "Where's the IDF? Where's the IDF?" It's like when you've got civilians and police, down there saying, "Where's the IDF?" Somebody screwed up, and you would have thought they would have met more resistance, and Hamas was probably expecting more resistance, and basically they had a freeway into a rock festival, um, and so they were overly successful. How that would have been calculated, you know, the early reports. So anyway, your broader question was, how do you have a discussion with somebody who is now no longer culpably ignorant of the Christian tradition, right? And is not a pacifist. Well, wants to understand the just war tradition and how to think about these things. Then you're doing geopolitics, and people of goodwill can kind of disagree. It's like, and then that goes to U.S. policy. It's I think our carriers are there to to give a big warning to Hezbollah to not open a second front, and to give a warning to Iran. We can do some damage here, and now I guess I'm willing to have an argument with people on geopolitics. Somebody who's you know um, thinks, well, maybe we ought to send those carriers to Taiwan or something. I don't know. I think it's a pretty good decision to go and uh, and and help out the Israelis uh, on not opening another front. But those are questions of geopolitics. The question of whether Israel can justly, it is a just cause to eliminate as a threat Hamas, seems to me to be obviously a just cause.
Right.
And then all we got to do is talk about the means.
That's
Um, and um, and of course the question will arise. Well, once you've eliminated them, I mean, what's Hamas 2.0 going to look like?
hmm
That's I get it. That's a legitimate question. That's also one I'm willing to kick down the road.
right.
You know, uh, and Hamas 2.0 having their infrastructure utterly destroyed, and that memory, you know, um, and maybe getting the UN in there, to do the humanitarian work.
Yeah, I mean, it kicks it down the road, that question, but it also kicks it back to the Palestinian people. Now, they will hopefully very soon have an opportunity to demonstrate to themselves and to the world who they want representing them. And if they really do bring in Hamas 2.0, that's one set of answers. If they begin to move towards some, you know, outfit that can begin to move toward being a more responsible political community.
But they wouldn't be Hamas 2.0. It's like, this is where I just say, it's like, what do you want? I want you to fall on your knees. It's like, reminds me of what Braveheart. What what do I need you to do? I need you to fall. I won't say it. I'm not supposed to swear, but um, I want you to beg the forgiveness of the Israelis for quoting the protocols of the elders of Zion and for all that Jew hatred nonsense in your charter. Once you do that, then we'll talk business. But when you put it like that, maybe that's further cause for completely eliminating them.
Well, to riff on Churchill, Israel, as you and I have argued now for an hour, has to be decisive in the fight. And then to continue the riff, I hope after the fight is over and Hamas is utterly destroyed, that Israel can demonstrate magnanimity in peace, and maybe we can make some progress out of this whole thing. We've been talking for more than an hour, Keith. I think the only person left listening is going to be my mother. So we should probably wrap this up. But this is going to be presumably a long fight. And so I think there will be an opportunity to do this again, and I hope we do.
For sure. And we need to hit the road.
Yeah, that's right. A curmudgeon roadshow.
But not during deer season.
Well, of course. And not during Moral Fest. I understand that too. And
And
probably not
turkey
during
season.
turkey
Yeah.
season. I understand that. Retirement's hard on you, Keith.
Yeah. I'm retired, man.
Awesome. All right. Happy hunting. Thank you for the conversation.
All right. Great seeing you again. Great chatting.
Great to chat. Keith Pavlischek, thank you.